Hello, hello. It's Nadine here, and I'm here with this week's episode of Life, Health, and the Universe. And this week, I'm joined by my guest all the way from the US of A, Michael Rubino. Welcome, Michael.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's been a kind of like we've been playing around with our time zones, so I have no idea what time it actually is with you right now.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
so
it's
you're
not
in
too
the
late.
future.
I'm in the
Uh,
future. How cool is
it's
that?
it's 5 p.m., but a day
Okay.
earlier. So
Okay, cool. Well, let me tell you, today's been okay so far. So
I'm excited to see what tomorrow brings. Thank you for
it's
telling
kind
me
of
in
weird,
advance.
that stuff, isn't it? All right, let me do a quick intro of you, Michael. So you're the founder of Home Cleanse. I'm reading off my notebook. A company dedicated to addressing the worldwide health epidemic caused by poor air quality. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So you have got a huge BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal.
hmm
It is to improve the quality of life of 100 million people each year by 2030. That is some BHAG.
Yeah.
Like hats off to you. You're the author of a book, The Mold Medic, and you've been featured when you're getting your word out there on so you've got some great accolades. You've been featured on Gwyneth Paltrow's podcast, the Goop podcast, Vice TV, Vogue, Live Strong, to name a few. And now you're with us, so I'm super excited to find out all about you and what you've been doing and this massive mission you've got, because as the podcast suggests, life, health, and the universe, we can kind of talk about everything, but health is so like a massive part part of living, right?
Yeah.
And there are so many layers. And when you guys contacted me to propose this call, um, I it just reminds me of how many things and how many layers there are when it comes to being healthy. We might tick the exercise box, we might tick the eating well box, but there's so many things, and this is one. So before we get stuck into talking about all of those things, and before I ramble on anymore, let me hand over to you. I'm just shutting the window. It's summer here, and we've got cicadas. Do you get them where you are?
Yeah.
They're
Every once in a while.
really, really noisy. So
Yeah.
yeah, they were drowning me out. Okay, so that's my little intro. Welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about all of the things.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for having me and for accepting this opportunity to have an amazing conversation today. Well, one thing I want to say before I even introduce myself here is, it just made me realize it is so much easier to be unhealthy than it is to be healthy, huh?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
I, I,
Totally.
I That's crazy. I got into what I'm doing today about 12 years ago now. And my father's been a restoration contractor since I'm 5 years old, mainly fire restoration, but fires get put out with water, and water is Earth life source. So we really see a lot of microbial activity in that industry. But I never really thought much of it, air quality. It was, this elusive thing. I mean, air is invisible. What are you talking about? There's no quality to it. And that was until Hurricane Sandy happened in the northeast of the United States. And, tens of thousands of homes get decimated, poor, poor water damage situations. And all of a sudden, people started complaining about their health. And that was really an eye opener for me because it was the first time I realized, wait a second. So our homes can make us sick. What is this air quality? What's going on here? And I realized, wow, our homes can actually be gigantic petri dishes that we live inside. And when I started to dive into the science of this, looking at different medical reports, laboratory reports of people's homes, I saw a pretty stark correlation of how people are feeling based upon what their home is telling us uh, medically and scientifically through lab data. And that was when I started to go on this, 12-year journey, shouting from the rooftops, hey, I think one of the biggest missing links here to this health piece is air quality and the amount of stuff that comes into contact with us on a daily basis. It's something to the effect of like 100 million particles enter the body every day through the air, which is
Wow.
crazy to think about.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
some of the stuff that we breathe in, like our own dead hair and skin cells, aka dust,
Sounds pretty
not
gross.
nearly, I know, right? Not really as big of a problem. Our bodies are
Yeah.
used to it. But when we start talking about extreme levels of mold and bacteria and VOCs and all the things that we have in our homes that we don't think about, that's when things start to really get problematic. And after helping thousands of people get better by just fixing their air quality, I mean, it has been a remarkable ride.
Yeah. Wow. Were you, okay. Did you have any health issues yourself that you have kind of attributed to this or not really?
Well, yeah. So last year, I literally had to go on this entire detox program myself because, 10 years of going inside people's homes and,
Right.
doing the best you can to protect yourself, but nothing's perfect. I started to notice that I was gaining weight for no reason. I'm still not where I should be weight wise, but I've lost 40 pounds this year.
Wow.
And so when I look at
Wow.
it from this perspective of why am I eating so healthy, but gaining so much weight? Like, to gain as much weight as I gain in the course of a year, the year prior, which was about 50 or 60 pounds, you would think I was eating nothing but cheeseburgers and pizza, right? But no, I'm eating nothing but like cauliflower rice and broccoli and 6 ounces of meat or fish, right? And so it's really interesting to see how I just started going in this direction. I was tired all the time. I
Mm.
had massive bags under my eyes pretty much 24/7. I would get 8 hours of sleep, but not feel like I actually got any sleep. And so once I realized, wait a second, I'm probably dealing with this exposure to environmental toxins the way most of my clients do from all of this built up exposure, I went ahead and did pretty much the same detox protocol as most people do when they find themselves in that situation. And within 30 days, my everything changed for me. It's like it was like a light switch. I would say
Wow.
I started losing, 2, 3 pounds a week.
Wow.
I started feeling energized when I woke up.
Mm.
A lot transformed for me that continues to improve today.
Wow.
And as a matter of fact, I think probably at the top of 2024, because it's been about 2 years now since I did the detox, I'm probably due for another one because, I think many different variables exist, but unfortunately, because I've subdued myself to so much environmental exposure over the years, my detox pathways and my body may not be detoxing as well as it used to, right? And
Yeah.
so maybe it needs a little bit more support. But I'll tell you, sweating in the sauna was probably one of the most life transforming things that I did on this program because
Wow.
um just I think sweating this stuff out was it really made a massive difference and it made things go faster. So that is kind of my, health story in a nutshell
Yeah. Wow.
that only further proved my theory of how important this really is.
Yeah. Right. Wow. We're going to have a lot to talk about. I moved to, I'm on the east coast of Australia. And we moved 4 years ago to the mid-north coast, which is very humid, rains a lot, and a lot of people here complain of mold and damp. And interestingly, when we lived in Sydney, we lived in an old Victorian house. This is my experience, and I've kind of, putting two and two together, and I don't know that I've 100% determined that this is the cause, but I kind of think it is. When we lived in Sydney, we were in an old Victorian house, and there was damp coming up from underneath, right? So some of the walls started to show signs of damp. And at certain times of the year, my eyes would get really red and puffy. And like you could even feel in the house, it felt kind of wet, like the air felt kind of moist, wet.
Mm.
Um, and it always happened at the same time of year, right? That this puffiness, and it was obviously to do with the weather and the colder climate. And then when we moved up here, the same thing started to happen. And even in the last couple of days, we had some really hot days, and it was really humid. And I woke up in the morning, and you mentioned the puffy eyes, and I had really puffy eyes. And one thing that I find helps it is hopping in the sauna. And it's like I'm kind of going, I wonder whether it's because of the rain and the damp and the high humidity and like stuff in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like a small thing, but I really notice it. Yeah, and I think that because, like you say, you can't see it. Well, you can see mold on ceilings and walls and whatnot, but you can't see the air, and you don't know what you're breathing in and what impact it's having on your body, right?
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting about mold too is, a lot of people don't realize it's actually two different things. It's a living organism,
Mm,
and then it also creates spores, which are kind of like seeds, right?
mm,
Which are not themselves alive, but those seeds is typically what enters our body when we're taking breaths. And those seeds are about 2 to 4 microns in size. So that's very, very, very small, about 25 to 50 times smaller than what the eye can actually see. So essentially, when you're breathing this stuff in, it is completely invisible,
mm,
but yet you might see some stuff on the ceiling or on the wall, right? So it's always interesting because I think a lot of people get confused, like, well, how does that influence my health? How does that have the potential to make me sick? Same thing as bacteria, right? Like we know bacteria exists. We've been taught we have to wash our hands, okay?
yeah.
But no one realizes that bacteria actually gets airborne. And most of the bacteria that you come into contact with is actually being inhaled. Um, so it's interesting, to see, I think, how this relates to our homes and our health, because as long as we're not aware of it, we're not going to be taking action. We're not going to be taking steps to do something about it,
Totally.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that's been one of the biggest problems for me is like, you talk to doctors, and doctors, unless they're specialists in environmentally acquired illness, they have no clue, right? And when we look at it from that perspective, if we're going to doctors, and this happens to so many people, right? They go to doctors, they're looking for answers, they're not feeling well. They sometimes they get shifted around to 40, 50 different doctors. And finally, somebody says, hey, have you ever thought of maybe checking your environment? And it's
Mm,
like, boom, all of a sudden, they test their environment's not good. And as soon as they leave the environment, instantly they start feeling better.
yeah.
And that's been one of the most
Wow.
remarkable things to see. And it's like, well, how do we not know more about this? Why is this such this hidden unknown thing? And I think the reality of it is because we're so focused on exercise and food and the quality of water that we drink, right? That we've always thought that, as long as I'm exercising and I'm ingesting the right substances, I'm going to be healthy. And it's no one's looking at the air we breathe. And it's crazy because when you think about the air we breathe, 20,000 breaths per day, it is enough air that we consume on a daily basis to fill up a normal size swimming pool.
Wow.
Now, when you put it in that perspective, you are definitely consuming more air than anything else, more air than food, more air than water, more air than supplements, right? And then thinking about how we can literally inhale 100 million particles a day, right? So that's crazy how much that can happen. And these particles that are smaller than 10 microns in size, and I mentioned the size of mold earlier, it's less than 10.
Mm,
The real health hazard there is that anything smaller than 10 microns can bypass our self-defense mechanisms and enter the bloodstream. So we get hit with a double whammy through air quality because it can affect our lungs. And then if it passes into the bloodstream, now it's being ingested. So then it can affect our gut, which can then affect our brain, right? And so it's actually got a pretty severe risk. And I think that's why, what did we learn with COVID, right? Air transmission was the greatest route of exposure. It was the first time people really heard the word air transmission before,
Yeah.
typically.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're learning a lot as time goes on, but unfortunately, I feel like we're not learning fast enough. And there's too many people struggling out there across the globe. And I have consults with people all over the world. And when people come to me and they're struggling, you know, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I have two small little ones. You know, I want to see people healthy and happy, not sick and depressed. And unfortunately, there's so much of that these days that, you know, I just want to do the best that I can do to make the world a better place.
It's a pretty cool mission. um, okay. There was a whole bunch of things, and then I was like having these questions, ping, 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 coming up. Where do I start? So you've talked about. No, I'm going to go back a step. Actually, why do you think it's becoming more prevalent? Is it because we are less healthy in general? Like, is there more exposure? Like, surely mold has always been around, right? But there's that movie, the Fabulous Fungi or whatever it is. Is it Fabulous Fungi or
Fabulous fungi. So
yeah. So they talk about mold, right? And they say that is a
mhm.
type of mold, and it's been around and it serves a purpose. I
It
don't know.
does. It does serve a
Yeah.
purpose.
So, like, what is it? Is there more of it, or are we just more sensitive to it?
So, good question. There's certainly more of it, at least in North America,
Okay.
because the EPA and HUD have done studies. They did a pretty big study in 1994, another one in 2006, another one in 2019. And I'll tell you, from 1994 all the way to 2019, it's getting worse. It's getting more prevalent. So the building practices that we have been pushing for, which tie into energy efficiency, really have been done in a way where we didn't think about the people living inside these spaces. Now, energy efficiency. So let's go back to 1970s. Richard Nixon's president of the United States. We're dealing with a global energy crisis. Okay. And it was a global energy crisis. So what did everybody do? Well, everybody said we have to figure out how to be more efficient with energy. This is pretty much a global recognition that we needed to change. So what did we do? Well, we made changes. Now homes get built, and homes and buildings, they get built tighter today than they did 20, 30 years ago. What does that do? Well, let me tell you. The human being is going to exhale a lot of bacteria particles, a lot of virus particles. Why? Because if you didn't know this, bacteria lives inside of you. So do viruses. It's not until your immune system is weakened that something like a bacterial infection or a viral infection would then take over. Normally, your body has functions very well living with all these different types of bacteria and viruses living inside of you at any given time. Now, when we are constantly breathing these things out, and we have things like water damage that allow mold to grow, and we have all these toxins that we introduce into our house via household chemicals, modern furniture, formaldehyde, VOCs, right? We're now in a situation where our body is getting bombarded with things that it has to consistently remove. And the kicker is there is no air exchange that's allowing fresh air to come in. Right. And, you know, we're talking like third grade science class here, where air will dilute the amount of particles that would be present. Right. So fresh air is going to dilute. So that means if we have fresh air, we're breathing in less particles because we're diluting the amount of particles in the air. Well, if you live in a bubble and you have all this stuff releasing into the bubble consistently, you're going to be breathing in more and more stuff inside that bubble. So then we have the modern HVAC system. Well, the modern HVAC system, huge in the United States.
What is that?
Well, it's a lovely system that essentially takes air in, conditions it, and supplies it back out.
Okay.
the lovely air conditioning
Oh yeah,
system.
I was going to ask you about that
So
too.
the biggest issue with air conditioning systems is they create condensation. They're designed to remove moisture from the air,
Mm,
condition it, supply it back out, and that's what gives us this beautiful, comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what the Celsius is. You'll have to forgive
21,
me for that.
I think.
21,
Yeah.
perfect. That's the ideal temperature,
Yeah.
right? And so in hindsight, we didn't think about the filtration needs to prevent mold and bacteria from growing in them. And we've just gotten to this place where now we have all these particles present. None of us have good enough filters to block these tiny particles from getting to the unit. And then it just starts growing in the unit. And did I mention the buildings were tighter? So as you can see, this is a perfect storm
Yeah. So
to
there's
just
more, and
bombard
like
your body.
if you're in buildings where there's lots of people compacted into apartments and stuff as well, I guess, like there's going to be
Yeah.
just more people producing more stuff. Do the particles in the air reproduce as well? Like, do they become more? Do they
So
kind
not
of,
the
how
particles
like,
themselves,
okay,
but if you have organisms,
uh,
they reproduce.
right.
So if one of these spores or seeds
Mm,
gets to a wet area and has the right resources to grow, that seed becomes an organism.
yep.
So in an HVAC system, you might have one seed that gets in there, creates an organism. That organism reproduces more and more seeds. The organism colonizes and grows bigger and bigger, and it's just reproducing tons of particles that we'd be breathing in. So that's kind of how this works. So, a leak that happens in somebody's home,
Mm,
not a big deal at first, but if you don't fix that leak quickly and you
yeah,
allow it to continue to happen, it's going to
that
be
spreads.
a living petri dish
Ah,
inside your wall thereafter, and it will reproduce at that point. And that's how we start to see. And it's unfortunately, buildings are not designed to last forever. They're not designed to keep water out forever. Nothing lasts forever, unfortunately. And so they're gonna leak. Statistically speaking, it's like one every 10 years.
mm,
So unfortunately, if your house is built in 1980, let's say, you've got probably at this point 4 major leaks that would have occurred.
yeah.
And, if they weren't fixed properly, they could still be impacting you 40 years later. And that's what we see all the time.
Wow. Okay. What about I just wrote something down somewhere. Ah, does it climate, like, are we seeing more rainfall? Is that contributing to it or not really?
Well, we certainly are seeing, more frequency of storms and
Mm,
rainfall and all of these things. And obviously it depends on the climate and
yeah.
where you're located.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we are seeing historic devastation,
Mm,
especially from the southeast through the northeast of the US.
right.
It's
Yeah.
every fall we expect to see all these different hurricanes, and they're getting more ferocious and worse, and even the smaller ones are creating more damage, right? So I think that definitely plays a part in it as well. But I think for me, we've got the perfect storm. We've gone so far in this direction of energy efficiency without
Right.
putting countermeasures in place.
Yeah, sure.
And then you have more rainfall and more storms.
Mm,
And then you've just got modern HVAC systems and
mm,
how that influences that. And at the end of the day, it's our bodies can only handle so much,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's when we start to see an increase in chronic disease and autoimmune
Yeah.
disorders. And look, if we take out Google right now and ask how sick are we, you'll see as a global population, we have never been sicker than we are today. We get increasingly sicker. Over 60% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition, 40% of the global population, multiple chronic conditions, meaning two or more. And how could that be if we are healthier, right? And maybe healthier is the wrong word. How could that be if we are trying
Yeah. If
harder than
you're a
ever
health
before to be
conscious,
healthier?
yeah. Yeah.
Like we've got pelotons and this and that in our home environments. We have workout equipment. We are We have never been fitter.
We've got more availability to food than ever.
We have everything's organic, even, big, huge chain warehouse, Costco stores, right? They have organic groceries. I mean, you literally have better selections than you've ever had in your entire life to eat healthier. And I know we're trying. I know we're trying. We have cleaner access to water. I know we're doing everything we can, but when everything we can isn't good enough, when is it time to wake up and say, we're looking in the wrong direction?
Yeah. Or there are other things at play. Tell us about some of these. So we talk about autoimmune disease, right? And you say that it's on the rise. And can you tell us some examples of autoimmune disease? What are they? And what are some of the symptoms that people might experience?
Yeah, so there are a plethora of autoimmune diseases. Essentially, each specific autoimmune disease, like eczema is one.
Yeah.
You can have eczema for a few days and that wouldn't be considered an autoimmune disease. But if you have chronic eczema, that would be an autoimmune disease, right? What's interesting about autoimmune diseases, there are many of them. Chronic fatigue syndrome can be considered another one, right? All of them are diseases which are not known what the cause is and there is no cure. So essentially, when you develop an autoimmune disease, it typically develops due to chronic inflammation. You now are basically told by our medical system that this is your new life, you live with this, and here's how you manage these symptoms.
Yeah.
Which to me is like, why aren't we asking ourselves what causes this and diving into that? But sometimes it's just the way things work. We don't know the answer, so we say, you have to live with it. All of these diseases, pick any one, rheumatoid arthritis, SIBO, pick any one and watch how they've all been increasing over time. And we're not asking ferociously enough, why that is. Now, when you look at the science behind autoimmune diseases, they pretty much all start in the same fashion. Something happens that triggers this, and they believe it's genetics, genetic predispositions. They believe that it could be environmental, right? So that could be environmental breathing in, it could be environmental what you're eating, diet, all of that kind of stuff. And that is pretty much what they've figured out of what could be the response to this. But it's an immune response.
Yeah.
Your immune system is responding to something not well in your body.
And with autoimmune, am I right in saying that what happens with all of these kind of autoimmune disease is that our body starts attacking itself? So we become unable to fight off infection or imbalances. Is that what happens?
Yeah, that typically is what happens, because when you're dealing with chronic inflammation, your body naturally responds to that inflammation.
And so it's kind of like an overreaction to an increased sensitivity to different
so one of the best symptoms to explain this whole response would be mast cell activation syndrome.
Yes. Okay.
So that is literally when your body is in a hyperactive state and you are fighting your own cells.
Yeah.
Your white blood cells are fighting its own cells because it can't determine what is a foreign substance that should be fought and the own cells that contain inside the body. And what does this develop? Chronic inflammation. And I think that's, obviously there's different levels of chronic inflammation. It can be acute chronic inflammation or it could be extreme chronic inflammation. All these avenues, all these roads, they point back to the same place. It's chronic inflammation. Well, what causes chronic inflammation? Well, certainly breathing in things that are not good for your health could absolutely cause chronic inflammation, right? We've seen that from chemicals. We've seen that from particles. We're seeing it from mold. We've seen it from bacteria, and it's interesting to me is because if you actually start to piece the data together, it makes perfect sense. The problem is that our medical communities across the world, they're not looking in this direction. It's like we've all grown up in this civilization thinking, how could we possibly ever get sick from the quality of air? I mean, look, everybody can Google right now, air quality health. You're going to see all kinds of news organizations, BBC, New York Times, all very reputable organizations showing you different studies that exist on how air quality affects the health. The information's out there, but how many people know about it? And that's the problem. Right. And it's not just people, it's doctors too, the healthcare professionals that we look up to when we're not feeling well, for them to find and give us answers like the investigators that we hope they are. But they're not, because they're not getting educated on this either, just like the rest of us. And
it almost
really
is like
the problem.
The last resort, isn't it? Digging deep enough to find this ultimate cause of illness. I read a book called Toxic. Neil Nathan. Yeah. Apologize, I haven't read your book.
That's okay. It's no problem at all.
I guess like what I'd just like to comment on is an example of someone who, like, he shares some stories of patients that he's had. So he talks about the toxicity, just as you do, and how exposure to things like mold can cause these terrible autoimmune diseases that people think that they are basically destined to live with, right, for the rest of their days. And I recalled there was this one woman, I can't remember what autoimmune disease she had. She was quite a high flying executive, and she started to get brain fog and feel really fatigued. And like, she literally got to a point where she could barely walk. Like, this is what happens to people. And just as you've mentioned, like, she went, obviously went to doctors. She had to give up her job. She was trying to find out what the cause was. And eventually she found out that it was because of some kind of exposure to toxic, I'm not sure if hers was mold, but it was definitely an autoimmune disease that was then treated. And she got back to normal, like, from literally not being able to walk. This is how extreme these things can become. And like you said, it's like, we just kind of blow it off like, air quality, surely it wouldn't be that bad, or a little bit of mold in our house, surely it, just a little bit of wipe it off, can't see it, it's not there, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest issues that I see is, unless it happens to you, you just don't think it's gonna happen to you. And that is definitely part of the problem, because a lot of this stuff could be prevented if you looked at it proactively. And let's face it, if you start getting mold and bacteria problems, you're gonna have to renovate your home. It's gonna be expensive. So you're much better off looking into things now, making sure, being aware of it now, making sure you're inspecting your roof and windows and all the points that water can intrude, and making sure your HVAC system's clean and properly maintained if you have one. Because the alternative is getting sick and then still not believing you're sick because it's your house, going on this journey to circle right back full circle to realize it is your house. And all the time and money spent in between that gets wasted. This is probably the average person that I'm describing, is the exact client story that I could share on almost every client. And it doesn't matter how rich they are or how poor they are or what their social status is. It happens to all of us. Why? Because what do we have in common? We live indoors. And if we can just shorten that suffering cycle just a little bit, just give people the information in a clear and concise way so that they can understand, wow, I never thought about the quality of air that I breathe inside my house more than ever before. And listen, I know there are people listening that are probably very health conscious that might have some air purifiers plugged in around their house, and that helps for sure. But let's go a step further. Like, let's look at our house. Let's look at the roof. Let's look at the windows. Let's test for mold. Because if we find mold, we're going to find bacteria. They grow in the same locations, taking up the same amount of real estate from water, because they both need water to grow and survive. So when we start looking at these different culprits that affect our air quality inside our house, if we start to do things about it, I bet if one person from this podcast listening goes and finds something and fixes it, even if they feel 99% healthy, I bet you it makes a difference.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd love to pick your brains a little bit about some of those things that we can do to check what's going on in our own homes. But I'd also like to hear a bit more about like so you mentioned right at the beginning that we're here to talk about home cleanse, right? Which is the system, would we call it, that you've developed to help people who do find mold in their homes.
Yeah.
And to help them clean it up and purify their air. So you talked about going on this long journey of, finding out what is actually going on. Then from all of that information that you've uncovered, how did you go about developing the system that you've got? Like,
yeah.
how did you go from those two things? Do you have a background as a scientist, or or was it just like?
Well, no, I had to basically develop a background as a scientist. My background was in I was in my mid-20s, and I just got out of school and I was studying marketing. Okay. So I went from marketing to, let me work for my dad a little bit and show him some modernized marketing tactics holy cow, we have a problem here with what's going on. To then I have to study microbiology, because I have to, in order for me to create and develop a process, I have to understand what is happening from the microbiology world that's impacting the construction world. Okay. In the United States, we have these big, massive, companies that if you have water intrude into your house, you would call your insurance company. Your insurance company would send one of these big, massive companies to your house. And it's a very much so construction like world where they come in, they rip some stuff out, maybe they spray some chemicals, and they're at your front door. They're mainly billing the insurance companies for all the fans they set up all over the place to just, dry everything out. It's like a whole, when I really started to understand what is happening, I was completely mind blown, because just setting up the fans is a problem, because now you're blowing this stuff around. So just that in itself is a problem.
Okay.
This gets done. There are 50,000 companies in the United States alone that come in this same approach, cut stuff out, set up fans, and just blow stuff around.
Wow.
So I quickly realized, okay, there is a fundamental problem with how this whole industry looks at this. Because you have the organism itself, which that's all they're concerned with. Okay.
Yep.
But then you have the byproducts that the organism creates, the spores, the toxins, that they are not educating people on. I don't even think that they themselves are educated on it. And certainly they're not addressing
up, right?
They just want to get out of there and get paid, right? Yeah. At the end of the day, they have made such a mess in people's homes that for 7 years after this hurricane, I was still refixing homes that were supposedly fixed. And I think that's how I started to kind of, build a name for myself, if you will, as this person that really understands and can help people. Thereafter, the process really is fundamentally very simple. And I think when things are simple, they work. You have to open the wall. You have to remove the mold organism. But then you have to understand, okay, well, that organism might have been there for 2 years. And in those 2 years, it's been creating these particles. And we have to understand if it's in the HVAC, because if so, that's got to be cleaned and dealt with properly. Then what about all the person's stuff? Well, it settles in the dust. It becomes a part of our stuff, essentially. Well, all that has to be cleaned.
Wow.
The house
Oh my
itself
God.
and all the dust that's been accumulating in that house, that has to be cleaned, right? So I started developing this very thorough process. And of course, insurance companies were not very friendly towards this adaptation to process. But it's necessary. And after doing this, the way I've been doing it for the past 12 years, it was really amazing to see. They're the main organization that provides standards that the insurance companies use is now changing to follow closer to my process, which is great because that means that these insurance companies are going to have to pay a little more money to do things a little more properly, which is what we need. After developing that process, I started getting calls from people all over the country. It wasn't just the New York area where I'm from. California needed help and Florida needed help and Iowa needed help. And I pretty much was forced into figuring out how to make a nationwide company at that point to cover and go anywhere where needed.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, it went from like one truck and a couple of people that were trained by me to like 25 trucks and many people trained by me. And it is extremely rewarding, extremely exhausting. And, it's a roller coaster of fun, excitement, and challenges, frankly.
Right. Yeah.
And, that is pretty much how, the story goes with processes and all of these things. But, all I really did, I didn't invent anything. I didn't really figure anything out that wasn't already written by other scientists in textbooks. But what happens is when you look at it from this perspective of how do I create and define a process, I had to search maybe 20 different places and compile pieces of information from 20 different places to put it together. Like my cleaning protocol, it's not from the mold industry. They don't have a cleaning protocol. I had to take it from the chemical cleanup industry because, we have oil spills, we have chemical spills, and all of that gets cleaned up in a very specific way. And since mycotoxins are toxins produced by mold, actually more relate to a chemical exposure because it's a toxin, not really like a particle cleanup. It's a little bit different. And so I started taking bits and pieces from other industries and applying it together. And once it worked, and I can prove that it worked time and time again by post-testing the place after the fact using, a lot more technological testing standards than the industry itself did, then I realized this could be done everywhere, anywhere, as long as you apply these principles to the building specifically.
Wow. Before we talk about some of the things that you do and the system that you have, when the normal everyday person thinks about mold, we think about bleach, right? Using bleach, just get rid of it. Now, in my perspective, that seems like you're exposing yourself to two toxins. And I've heard that it doesn't actually get rid of mold. Your products and your system have natural, you use natural, no, they're not chemicals, natural stuff.
They're not chemicals, right? Yeah, natural, all botanical.
Natural products, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's obviously an important thing, isn't it? And I guess if we go back to like the basics of plants and how they operate, because I guess like mold is it's a growing organism, planty type thing. Botanicals have properties in them to fight off mold, don't they? So for example, I know that tea tree is great for mold because a tea tree grows in hot, moist climates, which are more susceptible to mold. So to stop their roots from rotting, they kill it. So it kind of makes complete sense that you would use botanicals.
Yeah, there are quite a few essential oils
Okay.
that are really effective as disinfectants. And that's what you're looking for when you're removing something like mold. You want to accomplish three things. You want to disinfect.
Okay.
You also want something that has a surfactant in it, which is really like the scientific term for dish soap, just to give people some reference here. You need something that soaps up and helps, degrease and remove particles. And you want something that is not going to be toxic itself to your health, right? Especially in today's world, there are so many botanical options out there. It's like, why would you reach for the bleach, go for these different things that, here's my take on this. If the directions tell you that you have to ventilate the room thoroughly to use the product, probably not a good idea. Because what it's telling you is if you put this stuff in a small room and breathe enough of this stuff in, you're probably going to die. So they're literally telling you on the bleach instructions, make sure you ventilate very well, or, a lot of serious complications can happen. Well, that's probably not a product I want to be using in my home. Now, listen, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Okay. So bleach was associated with clean smell. Okay.
Oh yes.
So,
Yeah.
I think we have all experienced that euphemism at some point where we think that, bleach means clean, but it doesn't. That smell is actually toxins entering your body and passing through your olfactory senses. The thing about bleach is for mold is it actually is not effective at killing mold or removing mold. It's effective at bleaching mold. Okay. And so I'm pretty sure you don't care about what color it is. You just want it out of there. And so there are so many better alternatives, like, botanical options. Thymol, tea tree oil, as you mentioned, these are really good essential oil-based botanical products that you can buy, that you can use to clean it up safely and effectively without any additional exposures.
Cool. Now, you were talking about when you were going into houses. I'm wary of the time. We were running a little late, so but I've got a couple more things that I'd love to talk to you about.
Yeah, we have time.
Yeah, cool. So you were talking about when you've gone into homes and you've had to like fix up these issues with mold and air quality, and you talked about like the furniture and the clothes and like how everything has to be treated, and I feel like that for someone could be really overwhelming. But I did see on your website that you actually have like you have products that people can use at home on their own. Does it well, I want to know what your system is. I'd love to hear more about that, obviously, because that's what we're here for. But like, are there different levels of what people need? And I guess that will then lead us to like, how does someone know what they need?
Sure. Yeah. So there definitely are different levels of what they need, right?
Okay.
Not every single person is going to need the exact same thing. And that's mainly because your house might have a totally different problem than my house.
Yep.
Right. And so, but I still need to get you solutions the same way I would get myself solutions. Right. And so the process had to be tailored to becoming a data-driven process around figuring out exactly what's going on in the home and then taking a plan of how you're going to address it. And I think cost is always everybody's biggest barrier to, trying to get healthier. And this is the same problem. The barrier is going to be, I can't afford to do everything. So tell me what's like the top 3 most important things I need to do.
Yeah.
And so we have a process for that, how we look through the data, understand what molds are present, how much mold is present, right? What bacteria are present, how much bacteria is present. Are we talking about something that affects a large area of the home, that impacts a large volume of air that you're breathing in? Well, good. We're going to probably prioritize that over a little leak in the sink, unless, of course, that little leak wasn't so little. So it's everything kind of gets put into a process that derives from data. Now, how does somebody start? Well, this has been the other amazing and challenging part of my journey was you start telling people, hey, go test for these things. And what do people do? Well, they call anybody and they say, do you test for these things? Good. Can you come and test for these things? Well, one thing that I forgot about was that, it wasn't just the people fixing the homes that had this archaic way of doing things. It was also the people inspecting the homes that had this archaic way of doing things because they worked together with these people not day in and day out. And there was this common understanding where you just came in and you took an air sample. And as long as the air sample was less than outside, everything is good. And that was just this whole system of how it was set up. And so people would call these inspectors. They'd come over, take an air sample in the center of their house. Numbers would look good. They'd tell them, guess what? House is perfect. Okay. So let's talk through why that doesn't work. Let's just say we have a room that is 10 feet long by 10 feet wide. All right. So my horrible meter conversion would be like 3.5 meters by 3.5 meters. The testing technology really only captures, what did we learn from COVID? About 1 to 2 meters away, right?
Right. Yeah.
This testing technology really only captures 3 to 6 feet or 1 to 2 meters away. So if I'm testing in the center of the room, I'm pretty much further away from where the problem might be. Because how often do we have leaks in the center of our room? Not pretty often. We're going to have leaks on an interior wall where there's plumbing, or we're going to have leaks on an exterior wall because there's, it's coming in from the weather outside.
Yeah.
So if I test in the center of a room, well, guess what? I am going to most likely show it looks normal when just 2 feet away or less than a meter away, if I just move this machine to test, it would show off the charts levels. So that became this other problem of people saying, well, my house is fine. I've tried everything. I am hopeless. My doctor doesn't know what's wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with my house. I had this person come out and, I'm completely hopeless. And so this happens so often that I had to tell people to get another inspection, and nobody likes to waste money when they do something, right? That I said, we're going to have to develop a test that is way more efficient at getting us answers on what we're exposed to.
And can people
so I created
do that at home? Sorry, I interrupt you.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we had to cut the professional out of the equation, because the professional just wants to come in and do this air sample. And it doesn't matter how much I educated the client to interview the inspector and tell them what they wanted. They just kept wanting to push to do the same thing. So I said, well, if we come up with a test that is consumer friendly, that uses PCR technology so we can get the DNA of what's actually there, we could probably develop a tool where people just screen their entire houses and then back into the data using PCR technology, and then create a reporting system that's really consumer friendly. Because there was other tests that existed, like the ERMI you might have heard of, right? That used PCR technology, but it was very confusing. So it almost wasn't helpful. So we did this. And we are working on shipping this worldwide. Right now, it's based in the US. And for the first time, people are using this tool as their step one. Do I have a problem?
So
and if they do,
sorry, do they do the test and then send it back to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like pretty much, I think we've all tried an at-home test or two before at this point. It's pretty much like every other at-home test. This was
Yeah,
this was a sample box here,
yeah.
but you open this box and yeah, it looks something like this,
Yep.
and it comes with a little like a Swiffer cloth, is the best
Yep.
way to describe it, and it's completely sanitized and vacuum sealed. You collect dust from across your house. You send it back in this little box. It arrives to the laboratory. We partner with the largest laboratory in the United States for environmental services, and they analyze it. It goes right back into our reporting template so that it's consumer friendly and easy to understand. It's beautifully color coded so you can know, is this abnormal or 10 times higher or 100 times higher? Where are we? What are we looking for here? And one of the reasons that, the limit, every test has its limitations, right? I just
Yep.
mentioned some limitations with the air test. This test is not going to tell you where the problem is. It's just going to tell you, do I have a problem? So this is a much better screening tool because you're getting an average of what you're being exposed to across the dust of your house, as opposed to testing one little cube of space here that doesn't give you an accurate picture of what you might be exposed to across all of the space.
Mm.
And what I liked even better about this whole idea was now people can take this to their inspector and they can say, look, I need your help. I see there's a problem here. Can you help me find where it's coming from?
Okay.
We're no longer asking someone to just take an air sample in the center of the room. We're asking them to put their detective hat on and actually help us find something. And now we're through this process, we put people back in the driver's seat. They are now empowered to control the outcome of the person that comes into their home.
Okay.
And that has really made a massive difference in people being able to get where they need to go faster.
Yep. So once they've determined, they've done the test, they've determined that there is a problem, what next? Does the system kind of go, all right, well, if you've got this going on, like you said before, you've got the leak under your sink, you need this thing. You got the entire house is pretty bad, you need this thing, like, or do you still have people that come out? Like, is it DIY or a bit of both?
Can be. So I
Okay.
just had a call with someone earlier before I joined you actually, and they're doing a lot of the stuff DIY. So we went over the results based upon their specific results. I was like, it's most likely in the HVAC system because it's not so high where I'm like, there has to be massive leaks happening here. And it's not so low where the place is perfect. So we looked at it and we said, my guess is it would be the HVAC system. I asked them some questions. When's the last time they had it cleaned? It's been 4 years. Okay, well, it's far too long, right? It's probably in the HVAC system. What sort of filter do you have? Well, not a very good one. Okay, well, if you don't have a very good one, these tiny particles pass the filter because they're not efficient enough. They're not capturing these tiny particles and they're getting to the system. And so we kind of worked through that. What sort of have you had any leaks recently? Because I noticed on the test there was a species called Chatomium. Chatomium takes 3 to 5 days to grow. Could only grow if there's a leak. Have you had any leaks? Well, we've had these 2 leaks. Good. Have you repaired them properly? Well, yeah, we did this, this, and this. Good. Was there carpet in that room? Yes, there was carpet in that room. Okay. What did you do? Well, we shop backed up the water and we just kind of put some fans on it. Okay. Did you ever just check underneath the carpet? No. We haven't. Should we do that? Yeah. I mean, might be mold there because the carpet holds moisture. You had fans on it, but how quickly really did it dry? If it's touching another surface, 2 surfaces touching one another, it traps moisture. So they had a laundry list of things to go and look at and send me an email about and tell me, to kind of figure out next steps from there. We got the HVAC clean. We're going to get the HVAC clean. They're going to clean the house after because we want to clean the HVAC first. And then probably a month from now, they'll retest and watch those numbers drop. The only reason a number wouldn't drop is if there's a source, an organism there constantly creating those particles. So you can't decipher exactly where it's coming from, but because I've seen so many of these things and have seen and understand how these problems develop, it's really easy for me even to guide people over the phone based upon those results, what's likely happening. And then they just have to do some further investigation, but they find it. Now, if I had seen their results and it was everything was off the charts and the colors were lit up all over the place, which means there's elevation, then I probably would have said, look, there appears like there could be several issues here. And I think the best move at this point would be to get a thorough inspection done so we can understand and correlate what we're finding in the dust to where these things might be growing. Because when it gets that bad, there's not just one thing you can do. You may need to really look at it and say, okay, well, how many of problems are there and what's the worst? How much surface area is this covering? And what are we going to need to do to give them the best, 3 or 4 steps they can achieve? Yeah. Because, when you get to that level, sometimes, it can be very overwhelming if you have to, work on multiple renovation projects at the same time.
Oh, yeah. And wash all your clothes.
And wash all your clothes.
Okay, cool. So you've got a bit of a system happening. You want to reach 100 million people every year by 2030. So what does that look like when it comes to like a process? So say I come to your website. Do you want someone to like go to your website and then have the test and then start using the system? Like, what does it look like for you to reach and improve the quality of life for those 100 million people?
I think, it starts with being able to reach 100 million people, and to further clarify, I'm not trying to make 100 million sales. I don't necessarily care if anybody buys something for me or not. What I care about is for 100 million people to now realize, holy cow, this definitely impacts my health, and they do something about it. Yeah. And there are many people I work with that do everything themselves. I sell them virtually nothing. And the reality of the situation is I don't even look at this from caring about myself. I have 2 small kids, a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. Mm. If the population has been getting sicker since I'm a kid and continues to go in that trajectory as I'm, getting into the grave, if you will, and this is being passed down to my kids and my grandkids, and I have done nothing about this, what kind of world are we leaving for the future generations? And listen, I could be wrong, right? Maybe my theory is wrong. Maybe it's not. Maybe air quality isn't the missing link, like I think it is. Maybe it's not. But if I'm right, that helps so many people. And I think that's kind of the place where I'm sitting, and is like, if I can help 100 million people, which is not easy to do, right, by the way, I'm sure a lot of people listening are like 100 million. Yeah, that's crazy. And I think the nice thing about setting goals is, you reach for this. If you reach for the stars, you might land up on the moon, which wouldn't be a bad shot either.
Yeah.
If I do 50 million instead of 100 million, I think I'll be very pleased with myself for the effort that I put forth. I don't have a process for this part. Okay. I'm gonna be very blunt
about it. Keep telling people and keep doing.
I don't, doing, right? If you ask what my process is, I'm on here with you. I try to go on as many podcasts as I possibly can because I want people to really get this information. I go on every news network that I possibly can. I'm wrapping up my 2nd book as we speak that hopefully does better than the 1st book. And I'm just taking every step that I can take, and I say yes to everything. I mean, people tell me you need to start saying no to things. And I'm like, no, because the more that I can get the message across, the closer I get to that goal. And, I think that if I can even just make a sliver, just a sliver of health, hope, and happiness for somebody, it's all worth it.
Yeah.
And I think that's key. There was a book that I read that I think honestly changed my life. It was called The Healing Organization. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, I haven't.
But the premise of the book is, there are so many of us that exist that create businesses, that are entrepreneurs that, want to make a living creating something unique, cool, amazing. Of course, anything that we personally create, we will always think it's amazing. We're biased, but the premise of this book is to not just create something cool or unique or useful, but to create something and to do good in the world. And I think so many of us, we rely on our governments, to do good in the world. And I think a lot of us, no matter what political affiliation you may be, probably get disappointed in that process, right? It's why every few years we're screaming, let's change regimes. But we just seesaw and that never seems to work, right? But what if we could do something about the world we live in by creating amazing things that help other people? And look, from an economic standpoint, how is our global economy doing when 60% of the global economy is dealing with chronic illness? How many people are suffering and in poverty because of that don't need to be? How many people are not contributing to the flow of the universe, if you will, because they are too sick to?
Yeah, very true. I'm totally down with what you're saying. And what I love about what you're doing is that, this is kind of like where I come from with a lot of the stuff that I like to teach people, and is that you're empowering people to actually go, hang on a minute, something's going on, and find out, because we do have the ability to take control of what's going on in our homes, in our bodies. And we forget, right? We forget life's fast. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we get exposed to a whole bunch of other stuff that tells us that we need to work, we need to buy this, we need to do this, we need to eat this, we need to, and we forget. Well, you could even go so far, then you get sick, and then you go to the doctors and you need to take this, and people just get into this whole momentum of like someone else telling them what to do. But what I love about what you're doing, and what I believe is really important, is to give people their power back, and open their eyes to the possibilities of what you can actually do for yourselves, to be more energized, to be healthier. And like, I'm totally with you when it comes to the small people, and teaching them and creating a better world and a better future for them, whatever that may look like. Because I've got a 7 and a 9-year-old as well. And I think it's really important for us to remember that if we're healthier, we're more energized, we can take better care of those people, and we can think more positively about how we can support other people as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to close. But just before we do, where can we direct people to find out more about Home Cleanse, your book? How do we get the word out? How do we help you reach your 100 million, apart from on the podcast, obviously?
So please, you can definitely go to my website. It's themichaelrubino.com. Okay. And there's a wealth of information, blogs, all kinds of amazing things. If you want to go down a rabbit hole, there it is.
Yeah, cool.
You should also follow me on Instagram. Okay. And it's at the Michael Rubino. And with that being said, so my book is under wraps. It is going to be out in 2024. And I'm not ready to promote it yet because we're still wrapping up and putting the finishing touches on it. But if you follow me on Instagram, or if you bookmark my website or something, I promise you will see it.
Cool.
But what I can tell you is the book explores how we have never been sicker, kind of like how I talked about today. And it explores how air quality may be the missing link. And there are a compilation of amazing medical journals, peer-reviewed studies, all out there that most people don't look this stuff up all day long. With amazing client stories, including the story of Gwyneth Paltrow and Christina Perry and some really well-known American celebrities. And of course, just your average families that have struggled as well. And I think what people can expect from this book when it does come out next year is it'll blow their mind. The data that already exists, the information that's already out there that draws parallels to air quality and our health. And people will be probably astonished. And you might feel a little dumb, but that's okay. That you haven't known this information before. And I want to remind you that I talk to doctors regularly. There are so many doctors that have these aha moments when I'm talking to them, like, oh my God, I never realized that could be that way. It is once you see it, you have an aha moment. But if you haven't heard of it, because it literally is invisible as you look around, it's just not on our radar. So I hope that when the book is released, people will find it informative, because we want to empower people. We don't want to just tell them the world's falling apart and see you later. But informative, eye-opening, and can finally take control of their health. There's so many people that suffer from this. I mean, I estimate about 2 billion people dealing with chronic illness directly related to environmental exposures. And if just a slice of those people can get healthier as a result, that's what I'm here for.
Right. And one final question, Michael. When do we expect to see your home cleanse system in worldwide and in Australia?
Well, Australia is definitely a market. Australia is definitely a market I'm extremely interested in. And the reason being is because mold and damp, I pay attention globally. Mold and damp has been extremely increasing awareness in Australia. There's some infighting with the medical community right now on, is it a thing? Is it not a thing? As I'm sure you might be aware of. The Sandeep Gupta is an Australian doctor that advocates for SEERS and chronic inflammatory response syndrome and mold illness. So it is very much at it's probably today where the US was 10 years ago in terms of pushing forth into that awareness category. So I am extremely excited about Australia. It's going to come down to some of the logistical challenges of being, ahead into the future a day, and, trying to make sure people get properly trained, and finding people in Australia who want to learn a new way of doing things. And of course, one of the other challenges in America, people pay for a lot of this stuff out of pocket, and insurance only gives them a small portion, right? So we have to understand, how do we help people in Australia? What sort of programs exist in Australia, insurance and government assistance that allows this system to work? And that's going to take some education probably of those organizations to get there.
Yeah, right. Cool.
But it's going to happen.
Stay tuned. We'll follow you on Insta and keep up to date with all of those things.
At least I will give you all the advice you need right now to handle things until I get there.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you well.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.